Oh yeah, I say to myself, you're such a lucky guy. To every girl on earth, it's truly a dream come true. 'Cause I don't want the fun in the world, she belongs to you. But it was just my imagination, once again, running away with everything. It was just my imagination, running away with me. Ooh, so we'll be married and it's a family. Yeah. A cozy little home out in the country with 2 children, maybe 3. I tell you what, I can get you a light, this couldn't be a dream, but to real it all seems. Yeah, baby, but it was just my imagination. Running away with me. It was just my imagination. Running away with me. Every night on my knees I pray. Dear Lord, hear my plea. Don't ever let it down and take your love from me, or I will surely die. So love is definitely good news for me. I hear a generosity, but in reality, she doesn't even know me. Imagination today, running away with me. It was just my imagination, running away with me. Oh, just my imagination, yeah, yeah, yeah. Running away with me. It was just my imagination. Running away with me. It was just my imagination. Running away with me. Oh, Morina. Oh, my next video's come up. So I might as well play it while it's here.
This information ain't true. Says who? Who has the monopoly on lying? Is it the powerful or is it you? Who should be arrested for tweets and posts? Is it the government or is it you? Hello there, you 5.8 million awakening wonders. Look at how we're growing. Look how you're growing as an individual. Well done for overcoming the things that you've overcome. Well done. I know it's been challenging. I know what it's like out there. My life's got easier lately, and that's This information ain't true. Says who? Who has the monopoly on lying? Is it the powerful or is it you? Who should be arrested for tweets and posts? Is it the government or is it you? Hello there, you 5.8 million awakening wonders. Look at how we're growing. Look how you're growing as an individual. Well done for overcoming the things that you've overcome. Well done. I know it's been challenging. I know what it's like out there. My life's got easier lately, and that's primarily because of you. But I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to suffer. I know what it's like to feel like you're not good enough. I know what it's like to feel frustrated in the face of monolithic power that you can't have any impact on. That seems like it's trying to crush the soul right out of you. I've been there. I know I'll probably be there again. And when I'm next there, I'll be there with you. Unified, we have a power that individually we don't have. And I think that might be the message of Guardians of the Galaxy, the bit where they all hold hands. I watched it yesterday. Seems to be the message. Listen, I had a wonderful conversation with the journalist Matt Taibbi about censorship, misinformation, and disinformation. He presented me with a fantastic idea that the government and the mainstream media have a monopoly on lying. There are countless examples of misinformation and disinformation that they've done. For example, just think about the whole way the pandemic narrative played out. Things that were true on the Monday by the Tuesday weren't true. People that said they'd had a vaccine on the Monday, they was coughing their guts up by Wednesday. What are we supposed to believe other than our hearts and our own lying eyes? Complicated questions, and Matt Taibbi really helps me get to the bottom of them. If you don't subscribe to this channel yet, subscribe right now so you don't miss a single post. The only way to guarantee that, I've got to tell you, is turn on the notification bell. And if you want a super safety, that's the double condom method, I call it. You've got to sign up to my mailing list, and I'll tell you to do that at the end, because I wouldn't want to assume of you that you'd want to know my innermost thoughts, come deeper with me on some of these topics. I shouldn't say condom and then come deeper that close together, should I? That's not the kind of language you want, is it? On this channel? Absolutely, it bloody well is. So have a look at Matt Taibbi. If you decide that you want to go on a deeper journey with me, you'll sign up to the mailing list at the end. But for God's sake, turn on the notification bell in case the algorithm's working against us. Then spend a bit of time in the company of Matt Taibbi and work out what misinformation and disinformation actually mean. Misinformation and disinformation, these peculiar new portmanteaus. What's happening there? You know, when we talk about how censorship in journalism has changed from, like this is again from your writing, Matt, like the pre-Trump era, it was understood that reports weren't supposed to avoid ugly or scary topics. We were supposed to dive right in a non-judgmental manner, like a doctor or a surgeon, and figure them out. Somewhere along the line, it became taboo to ask the usual why. And then from the first days of the invasion, I guess this is, you're talking about Ukraine again, the Times followed every other paper in cartoonizing the conflict as a standard Hitler versus baby seals showdown. And then, nice, well done, I like that. And I like that sort of selling jets like hot dogs at a baseball game. So another good bit of writing from you, mate. And then, like, and how do we sort of compare that with the sort of real disinformation from like people like the Clintons and the sort of establishment of this disinformation governance board? What are we seeing the advent of a new kind of censorship? Chomsky came on here and he said there's more censorship here, like in your country, in the United States, than in like sort of Soviet Russia. I was feeling like, my God, this dude's going to be the next one to be cancelled. Noam Chomsky's going to be right wing next. I mean, where do we go? Karl Marx is right wing.
I've seen that. I've seen people suggesting that he's right adjacent now, which is pretty funny considering that it's Noam Chomsky. But I talked to him about that too. He's adamant that the Ukraine war has brought about an unprecedented level of media control in the United States. I think that's true in my lifetime. Certainly, I wasn't around for the 50s when it was apparently worse, but you're not seeing any kind of reporting on what's really going on in Ukraine. If there's something that's an adverse result for the Ukrainian military, it just doesn't appear in our newspapers. Other kinds of information about things that are happening within the Ukrainian government or conflicts between Zelensky and the armed services, or things that are going on with the Azov battalion. We're not hearing about those either.
Well, how do you contrast that with a term like disinformation and misinformation? How do you see these neologisms being used to further support preferred narratives with, for example, the stuff that's gone on around the Clinton campaign?
When the corporate press makes mistakes, sometimes willfully, That's an error that maybe at best gets corrected a couple of years down the road, right? And we don't apologize for it. We don't call it misinformation. You know, I've frequently gotten in arguments with other journalists about this, saying that the problem with any kind of censorship regime is that the most damaging misinformation is always official, right? Like, you think about the worst things, the worst lies that can be told. It's always something like the WMD episode in the early 2000s. There's not many things that an ordinary person can say online that's going to lead to 500,000 deaths and tens of trillions of dollars worth of sort of lost revenue. But the state can do that, right? Like, officials can do that, and they do that all the time. They do it regularly, and that's why the censorship issue is so fraught, because if you automatically in any kind of censorship regime, somebody has to be responsible for deciding what the truth is and what it isn't. If that body is connected with the government, it just gives them a monopoly on lying, and that's what makes it automatically problematic. That's why you have to allow everything, because the only defense against government misinformation is the general public, and theoretically a vigorous free press. Although we haven't had that so much, at least having some people ask some, like you asking some questions about things, it prevents the total saturation of official misinformation.
I feel like there are some simple and observable patterns. One being Julian Assange's observation that the function of government is to transfer public money into private hands. Viewed from this perspective, the Afghanistan war is not a failure, it's a success. Another being that there seems to be this simultaneous trend to increase the ability of powerful interests to lying, in a quote you just a moment ago, giving the government a monopoly on lying, where ordinary individuals with a limited ability to impact anybody are being aggressively persecuted. I feel that this sort of institutionalized hypocrisy is terrifying, and a lot of the things I'm getting from our conversation today, Matt, around the removal of nuance, the inability for people to, or the presumed inability of people to access and discern truth from fiction, to be presented with information, source material, as you said, and make a decision, is actually creating a type of stupidity, a kind of a dumb inertia, like that we are becoming like nodes, just like the end point of this system that sort of barely needs us anymore. Once it was just the underclass, the people that used to be required for industry and manufacture. Now they're being discarded. I remember in that film, The House I Live In, that dude that wrote The Wire saying, why can't they people just be honest and say there's 20% of the population we don't need anymore? So we don't care if they're on meth. Don't matter, they don't need them. They can kill themselves now. We don't have a job for you, unless it's prison and like new forms of slavery. And then
Right.
8 cents an hour we use you. And like, again, existentially, what I feel is that we're creating a sort of low hum despair where people don't feel mobilized or activated. The counterpoint, of course, is that it does afford the emergence of demagogic figures such as we've touched upon. And what, and there are places where it's difficult to say this, and other places where you'd be applauded for saying it. What sort of I find inspiring about the emergence of sort of bombastic populist figures is it demonstrates that so much territory is being ceded. So there is so little conversation about what could be done. Like, the kind of videos we make, like, I find myself, like, without this being even particularly my purpose, I find myself going, well, couldn't you just overnight ban people in Congress from owning shares in companies that they regulate? Couldn't you overnight end lobbying? Couldn't you immediately prevent the FDA receiving funding from the pharmaceutical companies that they regulate? Couldn't you prevent media companies receiving commercial sponsorship from companies that they are going to be required to report on? Wouldn't you ban them from passing up your information? Like, there is regulation. As some of my friends who are less, what I want to say, cynical than me, and I'm a really optimistic person in some regards, they say that, the thing is, and I wonder where you stand on this, is that government, democracy, can do amazing things. It's perhaps the one thing that can be used to actually represent the people and responsibly represent their interests against these titans and Goliaths. But once you have this kind of corporate state alliance that we have in your country and mine, and not to say that it isn't particularly worse in Russia or China or whatever else, once you have that, then you have no reason to be optimistic about government. You have no reason to be optimistic about media. You have no reason to be optimistic about the miracles that have come out of commodity and capitalism and commerce. There's no doubt that there are some wonderful objects, gadgets have been created, but at such an expense. Yeah, I mean, I love some of this stuff, but it's hard. But I wonder how we revivify it. And do you think that, from our perspective, in our own way, as people that are interested in inquiry and telling stories, do you think that we're doing the right thing? Do you think we can do more? Do you think that we have to be more active? Do you think that we have to be almost more devout, more evangelical, more organized? What do you think, Matt?
Well, I think you're doing one of the most important things, which is to give people a space where they can think freely and not be under so much stress, and to be themselves, and to give them permission to relax and enjoy their lives, because that's what's being taken away from them, right? This constant panic has damaged people psychologically, and it's created a level of despair. I mean, you mentioned the thing about members of Congress trading shares in companies that they're voting on. One of the reasons that we have despair in this country is because occasionally we do fix stuff like that, and then people see years later that the same old thing is happening.
Well, what did you think? Do you feel a bit smarter now? Do you feel a bit better equipped to have the conversations you have to have when you live in this world, when you're fighting off the urge to conform or the pressure to conform? Well, continually being compelled, by the government as hard as hell, you yell to ignore the mainstream media's yellow.
Oh, kia ora. So I've quickly stopped that one so my other video doesn't pop back up. And it's all along, I guess, the same theme. So we saw in the weekend, we had the march, and we saw how influential the media was, and there was only a handful of people marching in opposition, and how the media's created, you heard a person in opposition to Brian Tamaki's march saying that, we're bringing in a right-wing type of Trumpism into New Zealand. Well, here's the thing, folks, reality check. The issue is really about freedoms and rights, including the ones that had the right to protest in opposition, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're standing up for. But what I like, and also Dr. Guy Hatchett has come out about the media sharing, being part of the propaganda with the government and sharing mis and disinformation, and how do we peel that apart? And if you watch my live on Saturday, again, using Russell Brand, and why do I use him? Because here's what we're up against, right? I mean, I'm a Māori activist from way back, but Indigenous people do not have rights if our civil rights have gone. So what's more important for me now is about civil rights and protecting our freedoms and our rights, because without that, then the minorities such as Māori, such as Indigenous people, such as other minority groups have no rights. So Mata, that's just making it very plain and very clear. I don't know why you're on my page, because you tend to challenge me every step of the way, and you try and highlight issues that aren't really there and aren't actually important to me. And I'd just rather say, go and find somebody else's page to bug, because you're becoming a hoha, unless you actually want to be part of the debate, right? And the debate is about our rights and freedoms. Now, I just want to share some of the comments that I made in my live on Saturday. So, you know, the weekend's been a big weekend for me, and my father had been gone for a month on Saturday. So, emotional roller coaster. But he is the wind beneath my wings, if you can understand. He and my mokopuna are the reason why I'm doing this, because I do not want my mokopuna to lose their rights and their freedoms in the future. I do not want them to be enslaved into a system that's created by the elite. So this is bigger than Aotearoa, folks, even though we're fighting for our rights. This is about humanity of the world, okay? And what I found fascinating with Russell, with the life that I shared, and Russell interviewing one of those scientists, like he was talking a lot of legal, not legal, science jargon. And so I had to peel away at the layers myself. But the gist of what he was saying was excellent. Once you get it, because I'm a bit of a visual person. And so by using a pilot flying a plane, you know, needing the instruments, needing the measurements to be able to make sense of the dashboard that's in front of them and what they can see as they're being a pilot, right? And here's the guts of what that live was about. And it's so important that we understand that in our own minds. So moving forward, we know that the instruments and the measurements and the dashboard that we're trying to make sense of, which is the world, and the media are the ones that we're trying to make sense of, it is creating the data that goes into those instruments and the measurements that goes like. So here's what I pretty much said in a nutshell. And if you need to, go back and watch that live from Saturday. With the pandemic rollout, we didn't have the instruments. So Pfizer data, we didn't have that data. So remember, I talked about Pfizer data safety sheet. There was no information of what those ingredients are in that vaccination. So the government, nor could any doctor guarantee to us that it was safe and it was effective, because that was the propaganda, right? It was safe and it was effective, and we now know they lied to us. So that's the data. And so there was no data on adverse effects, right? And I'd written to the Ministry of Health and to the Health and Disability Commissioner. And pretty much the Health and Disability Commissioner washed their hands of me, told me to go over to the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health sent me a letter and said people will die and people will get injured. That's basically, they're saying that's what happens, right? Well, if so many people are dying and so many people have been vaccine injured, they should have pulled the vaccine. And then this is what mainstream media didn't tell us, that 400 million doses have been contaminated. Now, were those 400 million doses sent out to the world? Now, this was all over the US media and mainstream media, and not once did our reporters report on that. So then again, see, when you're talking about instruments and measurements of the pilot driving the plane, if they don't have the right data and information, they're going to crash the plane. Even if they can see what they're doing, they don't have the correct data to fly that plane to keep everyone alive. And so once I figured out the analogy that was being used, it was like, bam, got it, right? So we didn't have the measurements, so that there were no trials. We are in the trial. This is Pfizer's trial. And so all the adverse events, all the deaths are going to come out of the trial. Here's the thing, MedSafe has 63,000 adverse events, right? 3,500 were serious. Okay, and that data hasn't shifted for months. You know why? Because it's not mandatory to for the government or anyone to get that information for us. Now, that's part of the data, right? That's in the instruments, and it's part of the measurements, which is the trial that those pilots need to fly the plane, to keep the plane in the air. So when we're not given that correct data, who knows where we're flying that plane to? We could be flying it to Timbuktu, for all we know. So having these adult conversations, and listening to the Russell Brands, and I will always go to Russell Brand, and I want to play Neil Oliver's video clip too shortly. And just in doing that, I'm on a little bit of a road trip today. So, but I've got a Muckle's birthday today. Had a Muckle's birthday yesterday. Had Dad's, big 1 month on Saturday. So emotionally, my emotions really are all over the place. And then I had a Muckle born only a few days ago as well. So, talk about the cycle of life. And so while I'm dealing with all these types of emotions, I still have to move us forward in this space, because I hope that I create an opportunity for you to feel safe to have those sorts of discussions, not just with me, but with your whānau, having more information and feeling more confident in having been able to have that discussion with your whānau, because it's an important discussion. Now, if we don't have the instruments and the correct instruments, which is the correct data, the correct measurements, which is, this was a trial and actually there are some major concerns, then what we see on the dashboard may not be the truth. And so there's another article too that Dr. Guy Hatchard has brought out about the media line. So I don't know if I'll have a chance for us to look at that. But just as a point, and it's come up on my Facebook, and I just want to, I'm not going to really discuss it, but I'm pegging it for potentially another live. So our New Zealand Super Fund, right, has appointed BlackRock, and they use the appoints existing manager BlackRock to 4 new mandates. Now, they'll be running our money. This is BlackRock who runs the world, right? So our New Zealand Superannuation Fund has appointed the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock Investment Management, to manage 4 new passive global equity mandates. Now, even the terms that they're using, mandates, that's our money. And so you heard Russell Brand talking about how some commentators, some scientists are saying that really all these people who are running our country are just there to move our assets from the public purse to the private purse. And why have we got billionaires? We've got billionaires because for a long, long time now, this has been happening. We're just only being made aware of it. And we always knew in our puku something wasn't right. So hence the reason why Brian Tamaki's protests, and whānau, we just got to wake up to him. We've got to be in Wellington. We've got to send a very loud message to this government, is that they've gone too far. And we're putting national on notice. We have to put these politicians on notice, and we have to rise up, and we have to put politicians in Wellington that are going to challenge them. Kanohi ki te kanohi in the debating chambers, and hold them accountable for once in their lives. So he talked about 4 parties, minor parties coming together, because he's done his sums like we all have done our sums, right? And we need to get over that 5% threshold, because remember, the 5% threshold protects the larger parties. This isn't about MMP and democracy. That by having the 5% threshold, it's really protecting the first past the post system. If they got rid of, and there have been a royal commission on it that recommended that we get rid of the threshold because it's undemocratic. Well, the only reason why it's there, folks, is because they don't want people like me getting into Parliament and holding them accountable. So let's just put that aside. But I want to come back to this New Zealand Super Fund. We'll talk about it another time. I just want to peg it there for you. And just go back to my live from Saturday, and that just know that we are experiencing. What they've done is they've controlled. So we're talking about the instruments and measurements and the dashboard, right, for the pilots to see so they can fly the plane. When the pilots have a limited information, then they can't drive their plane, right, or fly their plane, right? And so the same with us. When we have limited information and that dashboard, which is our TV or our phone or our laptop, that has all this information coming through, we cannot make informed decisions about our future because that dashboard has been manipulated. So I'm just going to, and I don't know what's happened to my settings because I thought I sorted it out on Saturday, but obviously not. When I mute, you can't hear, but I can hear. That's why I'm asking you if you can hear at your end. So I'm going to just play Neil Oliver, and it's really important because what is Brian Tamaki really pushing for? And you're going to get people say, this guy is all about taking money from the poor and enriching himself. We need to put all those issues aside, and because at the end of the day, we've got one shot at this, and if we it up, we're history, right? So let's put all these minor issues, because at the end of the day, on the scheme of things, they are minor issues. What we are fighting for is to get ourselves out of enslavement, because that's what they're doing. They're forcing us towards a social credit system. And I tell you what, I'm going to bring all those issues up when we go out there and debate. And what's the bet? Mainstream media will not allow that discussion because they control that dashboard. And they don't want that truth out on the dashboard because guess what? Labor might not get voted back in, and nor and also National may not get voted back in as well, because the truth is coming to the top. So anyway, whānau, let's just understand that in a nutshell, we are living in a curated world manipulated by the so-called power elite, which is propped up by the media and propped up by governments. And when they say that these protests are anti-government, these protests are anti-enslavement, not anti-government, anti-enslavement. That's what these protests are about. It's about protecting our freedoms and our rights. Now, I'm going to share Neil Oliver's clip, and he's going to talk about the Magna Carta and maybe expand on our understanding about the Magna Carta. Now, remember, our New Zealand Bill of Rights and our human rights and those around the world have dropped out of that Magna Carta. Those rights, those common law rights. Also remember that when we got rid of the House of Lords, the Privy Council, that severed our common law access to the motherland, to England. So to understand that, and now we have what we call the Supreme Court. And, rightfully or wrongfully, that's our system, folks. But anyway, I was going to mute. I'll mute. Please let me know straight away if you can't hear, because then I'll unmute you again. And I'll try and have a tutu with my settings again. But anyway, thank you for having the patience with me in regards to technology, because it's just me. Russell Brand's got a whole team around him. It's just me and my laptop, and that's my team and my darling, who you can hear rustling around every now and then. I'm trying to tell him to shush, because normally when I play a video, I can mute and you can't hear what's happening in the background. When I have to unmute, you can hear everything. So anyway, I'm just going to quickly mute myself, sorry, and play Neil Oliver, and let me know straight away if you can't hear him.
any king or anyone in power was, from the minute it was signed in 1215, troubled by Magna Carta. Magna Carta was something any king or anyone in power was, from the minute it was signed in 1215, troubled by Magna Carta. Magna Carta was something elemental, foundational, and fundamental. It had the audacity to have the king accept that he wasn't above the law. It's a big deal. And forever after, for the next 800 years, anyone in power, governments included, once you get beyond the time of absolute monarchy and you get to the time when England and then Britain is controlled by a parliament, here today, gone tomorrow, politicians and governments also don't like Magna Carta. They've never liked it because it's a challenge to power. And I'm certainly not an expert on the law, but I encourage anyone who's interested in rights and freedom to contemplate Magna Carta and to pay attention to the fact that ever since it was signed, anyone in power has sought to edit it, change it, water it down, repeal its contents. It amounts to 63 clauses, I think. I think that's right. It's about 3,500 words long. And everyone with their hands on the levers of power has been bothered by Magna Carta's existence. That's a fact. And it's interesting to note that by now, and for a long time, anyone I got it at school as well, you're invited to accept that Magna Carta's kind of, it's gone now. It's a lovely thing to go and see in a museum. It's a nice thing to have a look at, but it doesn't matter. That's what they tell you. It's all been superseded by more recent legislation. That's an important word to remember. Legislation, which is to say laws that Parliament and the judiciary have come up with since. And so Magna Carta, if you look it up, I looked it up today. I looked up Wikipedia. I know you're not supposed to do that anymore, but I did. And Magna Carta is described in Wikipedia as an important symbol of liberty today. And that's an interesting choice of words. Symbol of liberty. So it's telling you there that it's not liberty itself, it's just a symbol. But it's worth contemplating an alternative, much buried, much obscured, much obfuscated reality that Magna Carta is, as it always was, liberty itself, freedom made manifest. And the men in suits and the judges with their wigs that sit in the high courts, they'd rather you think it doesn't matter. And so they treat Magna Carta a bit like a doddery old relative, some elderly relative who just stubbornly won't die. But they would rather he was out of the way. A bit sick and tired of him. But Magna Carta is still there. And it's just worth considering why that might be. And in some respects, as I say, I'm no lawyer, I'm no expert on this, but there's an extent to which Magna Carta is too deep for anything that has happened since to touch in a way that they don't really want to admit the would-be powerful. They'd like you to think that Magna Carta's doddery old fella sat in his armchair at the very end of his twilight years, but there's life in the old dog yet. For example, we're invited to think all the time that, and they told us during Brexit, amongst other times, but they said during Brexit that Parliament was sovereign. That was a phrase that reverberated around. And it's not. What's sovereign is the people. And I'm using that in like a collective noun, the people, us. We and only we are sovereign. Parliament, government, everything is subject to us. That is an inalienable truth. That is part of the tradition that's remembered as common law or natural law. No parliament can reach back far enough to do away with Magna Carta because it existed before them. They didn't create Magna Carta, so in no meaningful way, you can argue, can they actually touch it, far less rip it out, no matter how deep they dig around the tree of freedom, the tree of truth. The taproot of Magna Carta is out of their reach. And I say that, I offer that up just as a notion, as a thought, but it helps to explain why for 800 years since Magna Carta, the powerful have always been sniffing around it, trying to get at it. And they've educated all of us since to think that we needn't worry about it anymore. And it's just not the case. I encourage anyone to go and have a look at this for themselves, because it's so inspiring in a way to be reminded that these old ideas, they weren't whipped up out of nowhere. They come in a sense, that idea of making judgments based on your conscience, trusting that people who pay attention, who listen to evidence, can come to an honourable and honest judgment from their own conscience and sense of natural law, is deeply and profoundly important. And when it comes to thinking about safeguarding our rights and freedoms and privileges, it probably matters more than anything else to remember that we as individuals, each one of us, is sovereign. And together, the people are sovereign. We hold the power. We are in control of the government. And at any point, if we as people submit or surrender, or through some kind of collective absent-mindedness, imagine that the government that drafts legislation also has the power overall to apply that law without challenge from the people, then we have wandered carelessly into a dictatorship. That is almost the definition of tyranny. If the people who legislate also have the power to administer punishment, at that point the people have abdicated their responsibility for everything, and that's a profound wrong. The idea is that there are deep truths, and we forget them as individuals and as societies and civilizations. But there's a way in which, and there's a manner in which, we don't completely forget them. And some people go kind of fumbling towards them as though in the dark, or as though through a cloud of fog. They can sense that there's something there, which is the truth. And they try and navigate their way towards it. And they don't always find it. They don't always touch it, but they get close enough. And I think in this time that we've been through, these last 2 years, where people have lost sense of where they are, to some extent, some people have even felt as if they've lost their grip on reality, that they don't know anymore which way is up. But all they cling to and know is that something is wrong. And that comes from their natural sense of right and wrong. And it empowers and enables people, if only they would trust themselves, to work their way back towards the truth, to work their way back to the gold of truth. And in the context of our rights and freedoms, there's something there. The powers that be, for their own reasons, have hidden it. They've put it out of sight, and they've preferred to think that it doesn't matter, but it does matter, and it's still there. And no matter how hard they try, they can't finally erase it. It's there where it always was. And if we can just find our way back to it, we'll have the truth. And I think when you consider rights and freedoms and the common law and natural law and a document like Magna Carta, cast aside what you've been told, open your mind, and allow for the possibility that you can find your way all the way back to the truth.
Wow, that was brilliant. So I hope you've enjoyed the two videos that I put up. They were really, really important. And I just want to read out to you what Dr. Guy Hatchett has said. He said, our COVID-19 infection rate is declining, but New Zealand Herald continues to stoke the fear factor. They led today with an analysis of COVID-19, now one of New Zealand's biggest killers. He said, by science reporter Jamie Morton, statisticians are probably laughing into their coffee cups and school teachers wondering whether to use it as an example of how to misuse statistics. And so, you know, in the other previous lines, I talked about the data and statistics bill. I talked about the digital identity services trust framework bill, and how all of these bills are leading into a social credit enslavement bills that want to enslave us. So all of these things are interconnected, and I've always stated, don't get overwhelmed, just get informed. Information is power. And, you know, have a look at that dashboard and know that your dashboard, which is your TV, which is the media, has been manipulated and controlled. And what I love about Neil Oliver is how he talks about the Magna Carta, knowing that our Bill of Rights and our human rights drops out of the Magna Carta. And someone just brought up about the Pope repealing the Magna Carta. And so again, you know, how has Christianity influenced the way that we look at our dashboard? You know, and how we've been manipulated, and that's another live in itself. And I think it'll be an interesting live about you know, those churches. Have they sold their souls? Have they sold their souls because of what's happened in the last 2.5 years? I know of Po Rangatira who got sacked from these churches because they refused to get vaccinated. And then when a lot of mandates were dropped, and there's still mandates there, we still have those oppressive legislation there. You know, we're still in the red light system, whānau. So not all is good. You know, that dashboard has been manipulated for us to think that we've got a bit of freedom. But Brian knows, and I know, and you know, that it's all been manipulated to give us a false sense of security. So going back to what Dr. Guy Hatchett said, he said the Herald reports that COVID is causing 1 in 7 deaths. Their greatest fear is that we are becoming indifferent to the dangers. Let's fact check their figures. The New Zealand Herald, 15% of people are dying from COVID-19. About the same proportion of people who die from heart diseases, which is currently our single biggest killer. Attributed to epidemiologist Michael Baker. Again, he's part of the, you know, putting that false narrative out there, that data, that, you know, the instruments and the measurements that the pilot needs to fly their plane. And if their dashboard comes up and they have limited information, then they don't know where they can be flying their plane to Timbuktu for all they know, right? So anyway, he says that fact check is misleading for people unfamiliar with statistics, and he's not. Remember, he's not. He's a scientist. He said this statement could be confounding case death rates with mortality data, thereby making some naively think COVID is fatal for 15% of people. Less than 0.25% of COVID cases have been associated with fatality within 28 days. So that's the difference. See the difference, the data, the instrument. So the difference is the media saying 15%, but he said if you're a statistician expert, and that's why that bill is concerning, right? It actually says it's only 0.25%, 0.25, not 15.25, just 25.25% within 28 days. So 0.25% of COVID cases have been associated with a fatality within 28 days of testing over the entire course of the pandemic. And the majority of these deaths are not due to COVID. The Omicron rate is understood to be much lower than this. This is more than 60 times lower than the Herald article erroneously, Fane, could be seen to convey. And by the way, heart disease is not the biggest killer. Cancer kills more than twice as many people than heart disease. Cases of COVID are also believed to be creating unreported further believed to be greatly underreported. So cases of COVID are also believed to be greatly underreported, further lowering the case mortality rate. So, he's the thing about Dr. Guy Hatchard is that he adds his research behind his articles, so you can go in and if you're a research buff, just go in and follow the research. But and I did that at first. I was like I started following and I started going, oh, okay, so where'd you get your research from? So where you get your research from. So now that I don't have to do that because I know he's already done his research. And every now and then I'll just go up and go and check some of his research, and he's consistent. He's not gonna say something and not have evidence to back it up, right? He said the New Zealand Herald for the first time, COVID-19 has probably become the leading cause of death in New Zealand, attributed to epidemiologist Michael Baker. Fact check, false. Causes of death are established over longer periods of time than the 1 week of data referred to by the Herald. Many deaths with COVID are reported over time and delayed. They are often being entered into government statistics in batches. This causes significant and misleading volatility in the daily and weekly data. If you pick 1 week, as the Herald article has done, you can arrive at false conclusions. The absurdity of this can be established by going back to the Christchurch Mosque massacre. If that week's data had been taken in isolation, the Herald could have announced terrorism as New Zealand's leading cause of death. So you get the point, how statistics can be manipulated for you to believe certain things. Okay, that's his point. Fact check, misleading. 2/3 of people dying with COVID are over 80 years old, but the life expectancy in New Zealand is 82 years. It is unlikely in this age range that COVID is the prominent cause of death. It is more likely that the aging conditions associated with aging are major factors, as the Ministry of Health has not revealed how it is adjusting COVID death data. Now, so when I did one of my lives, we went through MedSafe, the latest safety report on vaccination, and they're up to safety report 44, and the highest, and I went through it, and the latest one says that the highest death rate is 80 plus, the highest in the first, second and third doses, right? The highest death rate was in the 80 age group. And so his point is that our the average age, when we die, is 82. So that's how data can be misconstrued. Is that the word? Misconstrued? Or be manipulated is probably the better word. And so it's great that someone like Dr. Guy Hatchett can just go through those issues and highlight where the media have got it wrong, and potentially send us, on that plane with our dashboard, send us to Timbuktu. if you get my point. Okay, so he carries on. He says, the New Zealand Herald, our excess mortality has increased this year and is now running at 10% above normal and likely to continue while we report daily COVID-19 deaths in double digits. Fact check, insufficient information. Any analysis of the cause of high rates of excess deaths will require information about causes of death by category and a comparison with previous years, which Dr. Guy Hatchett has done in other reports. And so what he's shown in other reports is that there's an excess of 2,000 deaths within 2020, right? And that was during the rollout. And he's found, and that's how he's done it. They've gone back and looked at past years, and you see a curve. So when the rollout happened, you had an excess of 2,000 deaths. Now, that was consistent with the deaths that were coming through on MedSafe, and that's his point again as well, whānau. So for those most vulnerable Kiwis, being boosted remained crucial. This is the Herald, right? Modeler Professor Planck said it's much, much better to get your immunity from a vaccine than from getting infected. And there's been that whole debate, and the science has shown you're just as much protected if you catch COVID and build your own immunity to it, minus the risks of adverse events happening or vaccine injury happening, right? So why would you want to get injured where it potentially can kill you or ruin your life for the rest of your life when you can catch COVID and you don't have the same risk? So here goes. Fact check, false. Studies published recently have found the unvaccinated people have 97.3% long-lasting protection from severe COVID following initial infection with any variant, whereas 25% of vaccinated people are vulnerable to reinfection with more severe outcomes. Detailed studies by the German government have found the rate of serious adverse effects from vaccination is somewhere in the range between 1 in 500 to 1 in 5,000 vaccination doses. The likelihood of adverse effects increase with each dose, and the immune protection decreases into negative territory within weeks of the boosting. This suggests that the repeated boosters are very risky. At this stage of the pandemic, the public doesn't need misleading articles like this one. It needs reliable information closely connected to current science, publishing, and objective data collection. He said, be brave, be resilient, and silent no more. So that's a lot to take in, whānau, and we've got a tipi Heidi soon. So I'll just leave you with that, and let's take all of that in. Let's consider what these scientists have said. Let's consider what Neil Oliver said about our Magna Carta. And just to quickly cover off the points that he brought up, is that the Magna Carta is liberty itself. It's freedom manifested. He said it's been used by the power elite as the what did he say? Dodly old relative that should be sitting in the corner, ignored. He said it's entrenched. It's entrenched, and it's too deep to touch. It was there before any laws. So governments can't touch it. And they said, and he also said that Parliament is not sovereign. We, the people, are the sovereigns. So let's get our language correct, And so, it just made me think about when my first year of law school, when we talked about the fundamentals of law. So you have, starting with God's law, you have the rule of natural justice, you have the rule of law, common law, and judge-made law. So those are our fundamental foundations. And sitting behind all of that is the Magna Carta. So kia pai tō rā. We'll catch up again soon, and let's carry on this kōrero about the Magna Carta. Remember our New Zealand Bill of Rights, drops out of that, and so does our New Zealand human rights, and we've got to entrench it. So that's the job of the new politicians that you guys are going to put into Parliament. Kia pai tō rā, ka kite anō, kia ora rā.